Hello and welcome everyone to the second Consciousness and Reality Colloquium for this academic year. I'm Kunal Mule, an astrophysicist and the co-founder of IMIX, which is the Institute of Mind, Intelligence and Consciousness Studies. Stuart Hameroff, who is an emeritus professor of anesthesiology and psychology at the University of Arizona, and at the Arizona Astrobiology Center is our co-host today. And we have participants from across Caltech, MIT, Stanford, Berkeley, University of Arizona, UC Berkeley, and IMIX. And we are also pleased to welcome members from Cambridge and Oxford. This CNR series seeks to inspire interdisciplinary investigations on a wide variety of topics that are related to cognition, mind consciousness, and the nature of reality. So before we introduce our colloquium speaker, as it generally goes, I would like to introduce all of you to this Q&A button, which lies at the bottom of the Zoom window. So make a note of that, click that, and you can post your questions by clicking on that button, and selected questions from that Q&A box will be taken after the talk. And as the tradition has been, we are going to make this more fun and a little engaging by having this poll. So I'm going to click on this poll button. Let me see if I can do that right now. And yeah, here it goes, launch. I hope you can see this. There are two binary choice questions. The first one is mind is fundamental. Mental activity can cause the brain and biology to change. A simple yes and no question. And the second question is meditation can facilitate top down or mind to brain causation. So please answer away. I will announce the results of the poll at the end of the talk. And I now request my friend Stuart to please introduce our esteemed speaker, Richard Davidson.
Yeah, thank you, Kunal. Richard, good to see you. Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here, and thanks for asking me back to help out, Kunal. It's a pleasure and an honor to introduce Richard Davidson, who has been eminent in the field of consciousness studies and monitoring, particularly states of enlightenment and awakening in meditation. And the maybe most famous work was with people from the Dalai Lama. Some of his who sent, apparently, I'm not sure I got the story completely correct, sent his best meditators, and Richard Davidson's lab measured their EEG, and it was presented at one of our Tucson conferences by Antoine Lutz, I believe, and he showed a remarkably high frequency EEG that had never been reported before in these monks, both at their baseline, which means a chronic meditation made a difference, and when they actually meditated. So that was quite remarkable. And it's just one of the many things in that area that Richard Davidson has done. And so I'm really eager to hear him speak today. And without further ado, let's give a round of applause and welcome Richard Davidson. Richard.
Thank you so much, Stuart, and thank you, Kunal, for having me, and really happy to be here today. So I'm going to share my screen. Hold on one second. Let's get this up. Can you all see that? Stuart, can you see that?
Yeah, you can get it into presenter mode. Yeah.
Yes, I'll put it in full screen. Okay, good. I am a neuroscientist and psychologist by training, and I began my career with a very simple question, which is still pertinent to a lot of the work we do. And the question is, why is it that some people are more vulnerable to life's slings and arrows, and why are others more resilient? In the early part of my career, I focused a lot on the adversity side of the equation and studied the brain mechanisms that were associated with vulnerability to anxiety and depression and stress-related disorders. And then things changed radically for me when I first met the Dalai Lama in 1992, who challenged me in my first meeting with him. And he asked me, why I couldn't use the same tools of modern neuroscience that we were using to study anxiety and depression and fear and stress, and use those tools to study kindness and to study compassion. And that was a wake up call for me. And it led to our work on these positive qualities of mind, and to an interest in the mechanisms associated with flourishing and how flourishing can be promoted. So that is what I will focus on today. Uh, let's begin with a little inspirational slide. This is from 2001. So a little less than 25 years ago, when functional imaging was really first coming on the scene. Here we were showing the Dalai Lama during one of his many visits to Madison how we can interrogate the structure and function of the brain using MRI. Just to sort of fast forward, this is a new book that I've written with my dear friend and collaborator, Cortland Dahl. This book is coming out in March of 2026. And a lot of the material I'll be presenting today is contained in a very readable way in this new book. For those who are interested, you can order it. You can pre-order it now. Okay, so I want to begin with a little bit of bad news. This is something that all of you know, but just to put a few numbers to this that underscore the fact that our well-being is indeed in rapid decline. In 2023, the then sort of Surgeon General of the United States, Vivek Murthy, issued this report on loneliness and social isolation. This is the first time that the Surgeon General ever issued an urgent health advisory on loneliness. And one of the remarkable things that he points out is the dramatic changes in the social fabric of our lives that have been going on for quite some time. So this is one of the figures from that report. I won't go into all these details, but if you just look at the figure in the upper left, this is depicting a metric of social isolation. And what it shows is that over this period from 2003 to 2020, this 17-year period, there's an increase of 24 hours per month in the US in the time that we spend isolated from other people without any contact with other people. And if you look at the figure in the lower left, social engagement with friends, there is on average a decrease of 20 hours per month over this period of time in the extent to which we are socially engaged with friends. These are big changes in the social fabric or the social ecology of our lives that really exact a toll on our well-being. The other thing that Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General, pointed out in this report is that loneliness actually gets under the skin and is a risk factor for physical health. It doesn't just erode our well-being. And one of the more remarkable findings in this report is that loneliness is a greater risk factor for premature mortality than is smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That's depicted in this slide here. And you can also see that loneliness or lack of social connection is more than twofold a risk factor for premature mortality than is obesity. And so these are really important changes that have been occurring in the social ecology of our lives that get under the skin and impact our biology in ways that are consequential for our health. Just a few weeks after the Surgeon General issued the report on loneliness, he issued this report on social media and youth mental health. For those of you who are parents or grandparents, you should be concerned about this. The data in this report are really alarming, and they show that there is a linear relationship between social media consumption and mental health problems in our youth. If you look at the bars on the right, they are showing comorbid problems, that is, problems in internalizing symptoms that include anxiety and depression, and externalizing symptoms that include attention deficit issues and antisocial behavior. What you see is that there is a linear relationship between time spent on social media each day and these psychiatric problems. And kids who are spending 6 hours or more per day are showing dramatic elevation in mental health problems. And the average uh, teenager in the US today spends about 3.5 hours a day on social media. That's not screen time, that's just the portion of screen time that is spent on social media. This is data from the World Happiness Report, and I just picked a few countries to depict here. This is from the 2025 World Happiness Report, showing trends over this 25-year period, or 15-year period, sorry, from 2010 to the present. And what you can see is that the United States is showing a systematic decline. The United States is in this orange color and is showing this decline over time. The country depicted here that's showing the biggest rise is China. And these are other important trends. And finally, I want to just show you one other data point in this sort of introductory section to underscore the fact that well-being matters. This is a study done across 151 countries throughout the world that looked at the relation between the average level of well-being of the citizens of that country and life expectancy. And what you can see is that there's a very tight association looked at in this way between well-being on the x-axis and life expectancy on the y-axis. And those countries that are in the upper right-hand quadrant, who have high levels of well-being and are living longer, are living longer by more than 20 years, in certain cases 30 years of life expectancy, compared to countries in the lower left-hand quadrant who are reporting low levels of well-being and living for a much shorter period of time. So these data just underscore the fact that well-being really is something more than just a subjective experience, but it affects our biology in ways that are consequential for something like life expectancy. So this is a statement that is basically a conclusion from 25 years of work that we've done, and that is that well-being is best regarded as a skill. It's a skill that can be learned. It's a skill that's fundamentally no different than acquiring other skills like learning to play a musical instrument. If you practice at it, you will get better. And the same mechanisms that encode suffering, including neuroplasticity and epigenetics, can be harnessed for the good and be operating to promote enduring well-being and flourishing when we train our mind. And this is really what I'll spend the rest of the talk describing. So what are the constituents that contribute to resilience and flourishing, and how can they be enhanced through training? So this was articulated in a paper we published in 2020 on the plasticity of well-being. I want to share with you this framework that we that we presented in this paper and show you then some specific empirical tests of this framework. So according to this framework, there are four key pillars of a healthy mind. The first we call awareness. Awareness is about being present. It includes mindfulness and skills of attention, self-awareness. It also includes meta-awareness, the capacity to know what our mind is doing. And this is may sound strange to some of you, the idea that we may not know what our mind is doing, but if I were in person with you, I would ask you by show of hands to say, how many of you have had the experience of reading a book where you might be reading each word on a page and you might go along for one or two or more pages, and after a few minutes, you have no idea what you've just read. Your mind is elsewhere. That's an example of not knowing what our mind is doing. But the moment we recognize this is a moment of meta-awareness. And this is something that can indeed be trained. So the second pillar we call connection, and connection is about the subjective sense of feeling connected to others, feeling connected to our context, to our place. It's associated with skills of appreciation and gratitude and kindness and compassion. And again, this is really the antithesis of loneliness and social isolation. And I will take a deeper dive in a few minutes and go into each of these pillars in detail. But the cultivation of each of these pillars has been found to be associated with improvements in our well-being. The third pillar we call insight. Insight is about getting curious about how our minds actually operate, and specifically how the narrative in our mind operates. We all carry around a narrative about who we are. The narrative consists of a set of beliefs and expectations about who we are. And these beliefs and expectations literally contour our reality. They filter our worlds, and they will tailor for us what we consider to be reality. And what's really important for well-being is not so much changing the narrative, even for people who have a very negative narrative. And there are people who have low expectations of themselves and negative beliefs about themselves. And of course, that's a prescription for depression. But what's really most important for well-being, at least initially, is to change our relationship to this narrative so that we can see the narrative for what it is. And most people don't even recognize that they have a narrative. It's operating under the hood, so to speak. It is typically not so consciously accessible, yet it is still operating to filter how we experience the world. And finally, the last pillar we call purpose. It's about staying motivated. And here it's not so much about finding something more purposeful to do with your life, but how can we find meaning and purpose in even the most pedestrian activities of daily living? Can taking out the garbage be associated with your sense of purpose? And of course it could be. It just requires a little bit of reframing, which is a skill that can actually be learned. Okay, so let's take a deeper dive now into each of these four pillars. And I'm sure many of you recognize this picture of William James. And in his two-volume tome, The Principles of Psychology, which was published in 1890, he has a remarkable chapter on attention. And I want to just read to you a passage that's one of my favorite passages in this book. And it says, the faculty of voluntarily bringing back a wandering attention over and over again is the very root of judgment, character, and will. No one is compos sui if he have it not. An education which should improve this faculty would be the education par excellence. But it is easier to define this ideal than to give practical directions for bringing it about. Really a remarkable insight by William James. And I think if James had more connection to contemplative traditions, he would have instantaneously seen that if nothing else, these provided a technology for educating attention. So how can we study this? And again, I'll just give you a few brief snippets. And here I will allude to a study that Stuart kindly alluded to in his introduction. Soon after I met the Dalai Lama in 1992, we began this pretty unique research effort where we brought super experienced practitioners to our lab. We flew them from, most of them resided in India and Nepal, brought them in for typically a week of testing. This is Mingyur Rinpoche, who's a well-known Tibetan Lama. And the average amount of lifetime practice of these practitioners in formal meditation practice was 34,000 hours. At the time we brought Mingyur Rinpoche into the lab, he had practiced for approximately 62,000 hours of lifetime practice. You guys can do the arithmetic, later, but these are huge numbers. And for a significant portion of their adult life, they spent it in formal meditation. And so what we observed when we recorded the EEG from these practitioners are these high amplitude gamma oscillations that Stuart was referring to. This is a figure from the original paper that was published in 2004, where we see these gamma oscillations that are enhanced during the meditation state. But also, as Stuart mentioned, we found that there was significantly greater density of these gamma oscillations in the baseline state as well, compared to age and gender matched controls. There was also an increase in synchrony among these oscillations across the scalp surface. Subsequent work, which I'm not going to show you, found that these gamma oscillations are even present during deep sleep, where they are superimposed on slow wave activity that we see during deep sleep. We've also looked at this in very different ways. Looked at the changes in attention that could be changed with meditation. This is with a study with totally novice practitioners who underwent approximately 25 hours of training over the course of 2 months. And I won't go through all the details here, but these are changes in resting state connectivity between areas of the default mode and the central executive network. And we also see changes in white matter connectivity that we measure with diffusion weighted imaging. This is looking at the superior longitudinal fasciculus, which is a major white matter connection between the posterior region, the posterior parietal cortex, and posterior cingulate, and the prefrontal regions. And we see that these changes in connectivity are predicted by the number of days of practice, more practice time leading to enhanced connectivity. So let's go on now and talk a little bit about connection. And I want to share with you here a study that we did a number of years ago where we took a group of novice practitioners, people who've never meditated before. We randomly assigned them to receive 2 weeks of compassion training, and we compared them to a group randomly assigned to 2 weeks of training derived from cognitive therapy, where they were taught to cognitively reappraise events in a more positive way. Um, and the compassion training in this study consisted of a simple compassion meditation practice where participants were invited to bring into their mind and their heart different categories of people. We begin with a loved one, where they bring a loved one into their mind and their heart, envision a time in that person's life when she or he may have had some challenge or difficulty, and then wish them that they be free of suffering and that they be happy. And we taught them simple phrases to use, or they can use their own phrases, phrases like, may you be free of suffering, may you be happy. Very simple, that they repeated to themselves. And they did this training for 30 minutes a day for 2 weeks. It was actually delivered online. Before and after the training, we put them in the MRI scanner and looked at changes in functional brain activity. We also gave them economic decision-making tasks after they finished the training to see if the people given the compassion training behave more altruistically on these economic decision-making tasks, which provide a hard-nosed measure of what economists would call costly altruism. I don't have time to go into the details here, but these are the behavioral data showing that participants randomly assigned to the compassion group in green behave more altruistically on this economic decision-making task compared to the participants randomly assigned to the cognitive reappraisal training derived from cognitive therapy. And there are systematic changes in the brain. And these changes in the brain remarkably predict the changes in prosocial behavior that are measured with the economic decision-making task. And here we see changes in connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and a region in the ventral striatum, particularly in the nucleus accumbens, that is often associated with positive affect and motivation. And the greater the increase in connectivity, the greater the prosocial behavior exhibited on the economic decision-making task. This is another study that I just wanted to share very briefly. These data were published a couple of years ago. This was done in a group of teachers who, these are K through 12 teachers, who were trained in 2 of the dimensions of our framework for flourishing, awareness, and connection. And we were looking at a hard-nosed behavioral measure of bias, implicit racial bias, particularly important issue in teachers. And what we found is that on this behavioral measure of implicit bias, teachers that were randomly assigned to receive this well-being training showed a systematic decrease in implicit bias, and this decrease was preserved at 6 months follow-up. This is pretty remarkable in terms of behavioral measure of bias. To the best of our knowledge, it's the longest preservation on a measure of implicit bias of this kind with training. And so this is just to show that there are some incredibly important practical consequences that may be associated with this training. So a little bit about insight. Insight, remember, is insight into this the nature of the self, the narrative that we carry around about ourselves. And one of the ways we probe this quality of insight is with physical pain. When you think about it, we often use a sentence like, we might say, if we're experiencing pain, we might say to someone that I am in pain. And what does it mean to say I am in pain? Who is the I that is experiencing this pain? And when we say something like I'm in pain, does that mean that all of me is in pain? Is there any part of me that is not in pain? And there are specific meditation practices that are done to deconstruct this self, if you will, to really gain insight into the nature of this narrative. And in one of our studies, we compared long-term practitioners who were doing this kind of meditation practice to a group of age and gender matched controls who are just learning to practice. And we evaluated their differential response to pain. And in this study, we used heat for physical pain that we can deliver safely and very realistically in the scanner. And this experiment was very simple. What we did is we gave each participant an experience of this physical pain. It's a 49 °C stimulus delivered to the ulnar area of the wrist. It's a particularly sensitive area. We deliver this stimulus for 10 seconds. I've had it done to myself many times. I can tell you it is excruciatingly painful. After the first 3 or 4 seconds, you really, it's very intense. But we deliver it in a way that's totally safe and does not cause any tissue damage. And so it's a very convenient way of probing the nature of this kind of self-identification. The other cool thing about using physical pain of this kind is that we know exactly where in the brain to look in terms of what's been called the pain network or pain matrix. It's a set of regions in the brain that very reliably activates to this kind of physical pain. And so in this experiment, we gave meditators and non-meditators this experience before they went into the scanner. Then in the scanner, they were given a tone which indicated that in 10 seconds, they're about to get zapped with this painful stimulus. Um, and so all they get is the tone that denotes that the painful stimulus is about to be presented. Then they get the painful stimulus, and then there's a recovery period. So we have aggregated the data across the different components of the pain network in this cartoon figure to illustrate the findings. So when a non-meditator comes in and gets the tone, what happens is many areas in the pain network activate. So all that's happened here is they get that denotes that the heat stimulus is about to be presented, but there's nothing that occurred other than the tone. And yet among these non-meditators, the pain matrix begins to activate. When they get the heat stimulus, the activation continues, and then there's a very slow recovery over the course of this intertrial interval. Among the long-term meditators, they come in, they hear the tone, and there's literally no significant activation in any region of the pain network. When the heat stimulus comes on, there's very strong activation. And in fact, in some regions of the pain network, particularly the somatosensory region, we see significantly greater activation in the meditators than in the controls. And then when the heat stimulus goes off, there's a very rapid return to baseline. You can think of this as the neural signature for resilience. Very rapid recovery and no anticipatory anxiety. So Uh, um, Let me move on now to purpose. Uh, um, uh, Purpose has been the least well studied of these four pillars. And where it's been studied most is in relationship to certain physical health characteristics. And it turns out that having a strong sense of purpose is probably the strongest psychological predictor of longevity among people who are 75 years and older. And just to give you one example of this, and this is a whole cottage industry of studies of its kind. Um, uh, if you These are data showing people divided into the 90th percentile and the 10th percentile in their sense of purpose. So those who are in the 10th percentile in the dark line, um, this is a group of people who are 75 years and older, followed longitudinally. They're matched at the onset of the study in the pre-existing medical conditions. And what's being looked at is the likelihood of dying over this period of time. And what you can see is in the group that's at the 10th percentile, having a low sense of purpose, they're much more likely to die sooner over the course of this longitudinal period compared to folks who are in the 90th percentile. This has been replicated now many times and is a very robust finding and illustrates how significant purpose is for our biology. Okay, I want to move on now to the scaling of well-being and to our Healthy Minds program. And I'm going to skip a couple of slides in the interest of time here. But we've put this framework, awareness, connection, insight, and purpose, and the training in this framework into an app called the Healthy Minds program. This app is totally freely available. It's produced by a nonprofit organization that I founded in 2014. And it's totally free. You can learn more about it by going to this website, tryhealthyminds.org. The New York Times Wirecutter named it as one of the 3 best meditation apps for several years in a row. Um, and It's also enabled us to do research with it. And I won't go through a lot of the details, but we've published 2 randomized controlled trials already. They're depicted here. The second one had a sample size of 662 individuals who were randomly assigned to the Healthy Minds program in red and a waitlist control in blue. And This is a measure of distress on the ordinate, and it's a combined measure of symptoms of anxiety, depression, and stress from very well standardized measures. And you can see a systematic reduction in measures of distress. Um, we've replicated this now a bunch of times. And I just want to share one other data set with you. On the right, this is a new set of data that's not yet been published, where we did this in educators in Louisville, Kentucky. And we had the opportunity to look at the students that these educators taught. So we find that there's a reduction on these measures of distress and improvements in well-being in the Healthy Minds program. And when we look at standardized math scores on an end-of-year standardized math exam, we found that the students who are taught by teachers randomly assigned to the well-being training, the students perform significantly better on the standardized math test compared to students who are taught by teachers randomly assigned to the control group. The students had no idea that there was any research going on. This was just their end of year statewide standardized math exam. And the sample size for the students here is, I'm not sure if oh yeah, the sample size is on here. It's almost 13,000 students. And so these are really exciting data to us, and indicate that flourishing is contagious. When a teacher shows up in the classroom and is more fully present, more connected, has more insight into their own narrative, and has a sense of purpose, they are more effective teachers and their students learn better. Okay, I'm not going to go through all this detail. This is just another RCT that we've done that's not yet been published, where we've shown not only changes, this is in a group of depressed patients, we've shown not only changes on self-report measures, but we've also seen changes in behavioral measures in terms of language people use. They use fewer personal pronouns, singular personal pronouns like I and me, and they use more positive adjectives in spontaneous speech after this period of time, after just 28 days of training. And I should say the average length of training here is 5 minutes per day for 28 days. We also see changes in biology. In this fully remote study, we use dried blood spots where we can analyze these dried blood spots for all kinds of things, and we've seen changes in pro-inflammatory cytokines. Here we see a significant reduction in IL-6, a major pro-inflammatory cytokine, with people going through the Healthy Minds program. We also see changes in the microbiome, which I don't have time to really go over. And I'm going to skip this last section because I just don't have time, and I want to leave time for questions. But I want to end by just underscoring that what I've described, I believe, is an urgent public health need. And when you consider this in the context of public health, one of the important analogies that I often use is with brushing our teeth. When humans first evolved on the planet, none of us were brushing our teeth. And somehow most of us have learned to do this um, for a few minutes every day because it's important for our personal physical hygiene. And what our data show is that if we spent even as short a time that we spend each day brushing our teeth, nourishing our mind, this world would really be a different place. So I really do believe that through nourishing our mind, we can change our world. And I want to end with a quote from the Dalai Lama, where he said, "The systematic training of the mind, the cultivation of happiness, the genuine inner transformation by deliberately selecting and focusing on positive mental states and challenging negative mental states is possible because of the very structure and function of the brain. But the wiring in our brains is not static, not irrevocably fixed. Our brains are also adaptable." So I want to thank many people who have been critical for this work. These are key scientists and collaborators. And I want to then also share these websites if any of you wish to learn more. So thank you very much. I'll stop sharing and happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Richard, for that excellent talk. It was just fascinating. I'm going to promise to share the poll results, so I'm going to do that now. There was some issue with the poll didn't get shared with everyone for some reason, but I believe that you are now able to see the results. Although a small fraction of the participants answered the poll, so far we've never had in this consciousness and reality series a 100% on any of those questions. And it's a record that on both the questions, we are having 100% yes, which actually says something very interesting. Richard, I think your works have influenced positively many of our participants. I have seen. But the first question was, mind is fundamental mental activity can cause the brain and biology to change? 100% yes. And similarly, with meditation can facilitate top down or mind to brain causation. It was 100% yes. So, thank you, Richard. I'm going to stop sharing the results of this poll and move on to Q&A. So there are some questions trickling in, but just in the interests of the theme of this colloquium series, which is consciousness and reality, may I ask you, Richard, what, according to you, are mind, consciousness, and reality, especially in the context of something very interesting that you brought about, is that the training of the mind can bring about changes in the brain. So the mind must be something different, and of course, I mean, heavily mixed with brain activity. So, what, according to you, are these things that we just refer to as mind, consciousness, and reality at the end of the day?
Well, first, I'm sure that there are people who are listening that are much more well qualified to answer that question than I am, who've spent quite a long time uh, reflecting and studying this question. But from my perspective, let me just say that um, what the relationship between the mind and the brain is, I believe, is still a mystery. And I think it's very important that we um, exhibit a kind of intellectual humility in the face of what we know and what we don't know. I think it is common for many neuroscientists to respond to this in a very knee-jerk kind of way, to basically say that the mind is what the brain does, which is a very common response. But I would caution us in jumping to that conclusion prematurely, and I don't believe that we've made much progress on understanding how subjective experience arises from the material matter of the brain in the last 100 years, despite the tremendous advances in neuroscience. So, I mean, there's a lot of hand waving around that and a lot of lip service, but I personally urge a lot of caution. So I'll stop there, and before I get myself into too much trouble. So.
Thank you for sharing those insights. I'm quickly going to ask our co-host Stuart in case he has any questions or comments, and then move on to the Q&A box.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. That was terrific. I'm particularly drawn to the kind of mechanistic stuff and your comments about the experienced meditators who had increased gamma in, as I think you said, frequency, kind of the density, and also the degree of coherence. And so my question has to do with this phenomenon of zero phase lag gamma synchrony over the whole brain, or near
Yeah.
zero. That the fact that gamma is so perfectly tuned across the whole brain, which is too fast for nerve transmission or even ephaptic transmission, because that would tail off. So I wondered if you had any insight about that, because it seems to be a problem for classical views of brain function. In other
Yeah,
words,
it's a great. Yeah, I'm sorry. You were about to say something else,
I was going to
Stuart.
say because if it can't be explained by a membrane transmission and ephaptic electromagnetic, then it would have to be quantum, which a lot of us think happens anyway and is required for spatiotemporal binding. And zero phase gamma synchrony is something you can measure. And if that's too fast for classical means, that would be a good thing for quantum approaches.
Yeah, I would love to better understand your insights about this. The honest truth is we really don't know what the mechanism is that is driving this, and I think that your insights are really spot on in terms of the zero phase widespread synchrony being a challenge to classical views. We don't we really don't understand the mechanism. And, if this can be potentially explained by uh, a, uh, um, a quantum kind of mechanism, that would be, super interesting to me and to the whole field, I think. So I'd love to talk to you offline about that at some point.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate you saying that as an expert neuroscientist that neuroscience really has no clue about consciousness because I'm in San Diego at the neuroscience conference with 20,000 people and like I don't know thousands of present nothing about consciousness and they're
Yeah.
all going down their own little rabbit holes. Enough of that. Thank you very much. It was a great talk.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you.
Excellent. Let's move on to this question by Andrew Huberman from Stanford, who asks what, in brackets, generally and specifically, is known about the functional brain changes or simply the benefits of interoceptive versus exteroceptive meditation. For example, focus on one's breath versus on a long or visual target or sound external to our body.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew, and thank you also for all your work, Andrew. I've been a fan from afar. Uh, uh, it's a great question. There are a whole bunch of things to say about different aspects of it. First, with regard to interoception, uh, I'm sure you're well aware that there are um, various objective measures, so-called objective measures of interoception that have been studied. For example, the measurement of one's capacity to perceive one's own heartbeat. Um, uh, and we've done some research on that. In fact, one of the papers that we published a number of years ago looked at heartbeat detection using an objective interoceptive task in very experienced meditators. And in this particular study, we used meditators from a number of different traditions with a fairly large sample size. Um, and we measured their interoceptive accuracy. We also measured their subjective confidence in their ability to detect their own heartbeat. And what we found in this study, and these were super experienced meditators. These were some of the most experienced meditators on the planet, who have had upwards of 50,000 hours of lifetime practice. And what we found is that on the objective interoceptive measure, they were absolutely no different from controls. And on the measure of their confidence and their ability, they were super confident that they were doing it accurately. But they clearly were not. Their performance was identical to controls. And so this was a sobering message. Um, uh, but of course, in your question, you were referring to particularly interoception of breathing, and one of the problems in this whole field of interoception is that it may be that there is kind of domain specificity. And so the interoceptive skill, for example, at detecting your heartbeat may be very different than interoceptive skill at detecting your breathing. And so, given that breath meditation, focusing on breathing, is much more common than focusing on your heartbeat, it may be that if we had a good measure of interoceptive ability for breathing, we'd see differences. We just haven't been able to explore that yet. Um, the issue that I think you're alluding to, the broad issue in your question, as to whether there may be some fundamental differences or what might be the differential benefits, if you will, of using an extraceptive versus an introceptive focus in meditation. I don't think has really been systematically explored. In fact, I know it hasn't been systematically explored. From my own personal experience and from being around people who have meditated for a much longer period than I have, and whose introspective or whose introspective knowledge I trust about this. Um, I don't think that there are going to be major differences. There may be some slight differences. If I had to guess, I would guess that it is easier to meditate with certain kinds of extraceptive stimuli than with introceptive stimuli. But that, I think, is probably an artifact of the salience of those stimuli. um, that you can present an extraceptive stimulus to be much more salient, like sounds. It's just more salient and easy to attend to than is your breathing, which is more subtle. Um, uh, but having a subtle stimulus may actually lead to greater improvements in your attentional capacity, because it's harder to do and you have to expend perhaps more effort. So those are just some associations. I think it's a great question. I'd love to see it studied more systematically. Maybe we have time for one more question.
Thank you. We'll do one or two quick questions. Yeah. So there's one question which relates to, I believe, those four pillars and other principles that you were mentioning. So the question is, how do these principles relate to chronic illness? Might they help long COVID?
Yeah, I can answer that quickly by simply saying we don't know. Um, I think it's a great question. I'd love to be able to explore it. We do know that these practices affect the immune system um, in interesting ways. And so it may have the potential to affect long COVID, but those data just are not available.
Very nice. Just a quick comment in response from Andrew is that thank you, very interesting talk, long-time fan of your work. Yeah.
Thank you, Andrew.
And maybe
Appreciate
we
that.
should close now, but I'd like to close with this quick question. Is Richard, if our participants have 5 minutes every day, what kind of practice would you recommend which would really count as mind training and which would enhance their well-being?
I'm happy to answer that with a very simple, although maybe not so satisfying answer. And that is that I would recommend that you do whatever practice you actually could do for 5 minutes every day for the rest of your life. And so pick something that you can stick to starting today and do that for the remainder of your days on this planet. And so it's going to vary. It's not going to be the same for every person. If you wanted to, you can download our app. It's totally free. And maybe you can find something there that feels right to you. But you can find something in many different places. And so I would encourage you to find something that you can really stick to. And that's what's really important.
Very nice. So, in closing again, I would like to thank you, Richard. But I also have a quick announcement that the next colloquium in the Consciousness and Reality series will be held on 16th of December, which is going to be delivered by Hartmut Nevin, the Vice President of Engineering at Google Quantum AI. So stay tuned for more information on that. So again, let me thank you for the fantastic talk, Richard. Thank co-host Stuart Hamroff and all organizers and participants who made this event happen. Thank you and have a great day, everyone. Take care now.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your interest. Bye
Yes.
bye.
Be well.